Whenever a trick-taking game is announced, you immediately wonder what's the twist in this particular game, because there might be small differences from one trick-taking game to another, whether trump is the same every hand or it's random or people bid for it. There's all these sort of minor differences, but there are hundreds of trick-taking games on the market, and you want a reason to say, I want to try this one. In 2020, designer Murayuki Yokouchi self-published Cat in the Box, a trick-taking game for 3 to 4 players that had 2 twists that really changed gameplay. Before we get into those twists, I'll mention that Hobby Japan licensed the design and expanded the player count from 3 to 4 to 2 to 5, in addition to changing some of the components that made gameplay a bit easier, because pretty much everything was done in cards in the original release. Now there's boards and some other tokens that make things a little easier to handle while you're playing. Here's how it works. Here are the components in the original version of Cat in the Box from publisher Ayatsurere Ningyoken, and the components in the deluxe edition from Hobby Japan, with Bezier Games being the English language partner. You can see the components are roughly the same. You have a player board, you have some bidding boards, tokens, and cards. One of the 2 twists in the game are that the cards have numbers but no suits, despite there being 4 colored suits depicted on the player board. Yes. There are actually 5 copies of each number in the deck, despite there being only 4 suits. That's a challenge. You use cards 1 to 9 with 5 players, 1 to 8 with 4, 1 to 6 with 3, and 1 to 5 with 2 players. I'm going to pretend I'm playing a 4-player game. We don't use the 9, so we use these tokens just to show the 9s are out of play. With 3 players, you can fold this over, just have numbers 1 to 6, 2 players, 1 to 5, and you cover those spaces. So put those out there. You're going to shuffle and deal the cards, 10 to each player. Everyone discards a card from their hand to start the round. If, for example, you end up with 5 2s, you definitely want to discard a 2, because only 4 2s can be played. That rarely happens. You discard something. And after everyone discards something, you are going to bet on how many tricks you think you can take in that round. In a 3-player game, you can bet 1, 3, or 4. That mirrors the original game. You cannot bid 2, you cannot bid 0. This usually forces you to do things that you don't want. In a 4 or 5-player game, you bid 1, 2, or 3. So everyone is going to bid something in player order. Let's say I think I can take 2 tricks. This player thinks they can take 1. After everyone has bid, the lead player plays something. And when you play, you place the card next to your player board to show what color it is. Because again, these cards have no colors until they're observed. And this is the conceit of the game, the cat in the box elements, because Schrodinger's cat is famously neither alive nor dead until it's observed. And similarly, these cards have no color until they are observed at the moment they enter play. So I put this down here and I say it's a blue 2. And I mark that blue 2 on the board to show that the blue 2 has been played. No one else can play it because we already know it exists. We see it right here. This is one of the main challenges of the game. Again, there's 5 of each number, except of course what we threw out initially before starting play. So only 4 2s can be played. You may be stuck with a card that you cannot play because all of the other ones have already been played. This causes problems. Now, I led a blue 2. Everyone else must play a blue card if possible. Now, it seems silly because, of course, the cards have no color and they can be any color. So pretty much everyone has blue. Everyone's going to play a card. Let's say this player plays an 8 and they play a 6. And this player here, they only want to win 1 trick. They play a 3. So this player wins. They are going to put their card on the side to show they won the trick. Everyone else just discards their cards. I got a discard pile, throw them all in the discard pile. Just keep this. It's easier than trying to collect the cards for the trick. And this player won, so they're going to lead something else. You cannot lead trump unless all the other cards have been played or someone has played trump. Someone has broken the trump suit. So this player plays something. Let's say they play 8 yellow. They think they're going to win the second trick by playing high yellow. But everyone else, well, okay, this player, I didn't play this before. This player says, yep, yellow. This player says yellow. And I say, actually, I don't have yellow. To do that, I take this token off my board to indicate that I am out of yellow. And I say instead, actually, I'm going to play a 4 of trump. That is not my suit. A 4 of trump. And when I do that, I play the trump suit. I played the highest trump in that trick, so I win. If all the cards are of the suit led, the highest number wins. If there are non-trump cards played, they cannot win that trick. If a trump card is played, well, there are one or more trump cards, then the highest trump card wins. So I win the trick, I lead. And so now I can lead a trump because trump suit has been broken. Now, you're going to keep playing until you have only one card left in your hand, and at that point, the round ends. Or you may get in a situation where you literally cannot play. So, for example, let's say I get down to this point where I have these 3 cards in hand, and lots of other spots have been filled, and the only spots left on the board here are the yellow. Okay, I'm just putting down things kind of random at this point. Let's pretend all these other spots are full. And if I have these numbers, I have no yellow cards. I've already declared I am empty of yellow, and these are the only spots open. I cannot play. I have caused a paradox. The game grinds to a halt. I have broken the universe because I have something that shouldn't exist. The round ends immediately, and then we're going to score. So the round ends either when we all get down to 1 card in hand, or someone causes a paradox and breaks things. Either way, you're now going to score points. If you have not caused a paradox, you score 1 point per trick you took. If you cause the paradox, you lose 1 point per trick you took. And if you made your bid exactly, I took exactly 2 tricks. They took exactly 1 trick. You score the points for the trick, and you look on the board to see your largest connected group of tokens, and you're going to score that many points additionally. So this player, maybe they ended up putting all these things together, and they'll score 1 point for the trick and 5 for the tokens. It would be much worse for them if they had taken a second trick, because then they would score 2 points for the tricks and nothing for the board. If you cause a paradox, you score nothing here either. You broke things. You broke reality, so you were not rewarded for that. You were punished losing 1 point per trick you took. You were going to play as many rounds as the number of players. You reset everything, redeal the cards, reset your board. So you initially start with all the suits, and then go again. And after the appropriate number of rounds, 3, 4, or 5, in a 3, 4, and 5 player game, whoever has the most points wins. 2-player has a little twist. We'll talk about that in a moment, but that's the basics of play. You're going to lead suits, declare colors as you play them, mark the board so you keep track of which cards have been played from the deck, ideally not cause a paradox, and ideally make your bid exactly, ideally putting together lots of tokens so that you can score lots of points on the board. Cat in the Box has those 2 twists, uncolored cards and point scoring based upon where you place tokens on the board. And they mesh together nicely when you're playing, because often you look at your hand initially as you're trying to decide what to discard. If you don't have an obvious option like having 5 2s in your hand, well, how do you think you can fit things together? And how many tricks do you actually think you can take? There's only 7 tricks in a 5-player game. There's 8 tricks with 2, 3, or 4 players. How many of those do you think you can take based upon what other people have already bid, assuming you're not the first player? There's a benefit to going first because, of course, in a 4-player game, I can lead an 8, and I'm almost definitely going to win unless someone immediately declares themselves void in that suit and they trump. Probably not going to happen. So there's an advantage to going first, and of course, an advantage to going later because you see how many tricks have already been bid. You cannot bid zero. And that's nice that you are forced to do something. You can't just lie back and try to group things nicely down at the bottom of the board and take nothing. You have to take at least one trick. And the hole in a 3-player game where you can only bid 1, 3, or 4, again, it's nice. It just puts a little edge there because typically someone wants to bid 2 and you can't. So there's a challenge there because the bid will never be exactly 8 tricks. Someone's going to be off and not get their bonus. Okay. There's some complications, of course. If you pick up your cards and you have 7s and 5s and then 3s and 2s, well, you're not going to have a big group of tokens because the 7s and the 5s, if you have no 6s, you're never going to place a token there, so nothing gets connected. That's a challenge and possibly something that might drive you crazy. You get a hand where you're like, well, I know I'm not going to score a large bonus whether I make my bid or not. And in that case, possibly you decide, I'm just going to not worry about the bonus and try to take as many tricks as possible, hopefully throwing off other people. You can try to do that. It's a fascinating game in that you're free to declare when you're out of a color. So you can take risk at particular moments to say, I'm out of a color, to do something to your advantage. You don't want to take a particular trick because it will put you over your bid. You do want to take a trick to ideally take it away from someone else or because you need it. So you can choose when you're out of a color. And of course, if all the spaces on a color are full, everyone can say they're out of that color, no risk. You hope that someone else will go in and fill those spots. If I say I'm out of yellow, I hope that other people will fill those yellow spots because then that will leave the numbers open in other colors so that ideally I can play my cards. Sometimes you're legitimately out of a color. If only 5 and 8 are open in a color and I have no 5s and 8s, I'm out of that color. I have no risk. I'm taking no risk by saying that I'm out. So again, there's 5 cards of each number. So everyone throws away 1 card. That means some numbers will still have 5 cards. And you don't play the last card in your hand. So ideally, you can play smartly and not get caught. That last card you have, it's often the 5th of a number, and you're glad that you're able to play it. Or, as often ends up, you are on the verge of paradox, and someone before you in the turn order has a paradox first and saves you. Now you're not penalized for causing a paradox. They did it before you, and no one knows about your psychic, your physics experiment that went awry and messed up everything. So the game has lots of interesting elements because of the freedom it allows you with the cards that you are dealt, with shaping your hand by throwing something away, with the bid that you're trying to make. And trying to assess your hand is super complicated until you have played many times. And as you're playing, trying to make choices to set yourself up nicely. There's so many good things that come together in this design that provide a fantastic challenge. Now, I've played 3 times on the original version that I got from the BGG store because we had imported copies when it was still available. I played 4 times on the new version, 3 and 4 players, 2, 3, and 5 players. So the 2-player game works a little differently. Let me talk about that. In a 2-player game, you play only with cards numbered 1 to 5. You set up the board this way, you cover the 6s, you have these available. Everyone gets a bidding board, even though you're not going to bid. Everyone gets a hand of 10 cards. everyone, all 2 players. You then reveal 3 of the remaining 5 cards, and you mark those spaces with an unused token color. So those are out of play on the green area. If you had revealed 2 4s, then you actually would have put them like this. But we reveal these, so both of us know these cards are here. You're going to discard a card like normal. You play 8 tricks, and that's it. You do not bid. You use this board only to declare that you are out of a color. And scoring works differently. If you have taken 4 or fewer tricks, then you will score a bonus based on your largest connected group of tokens on the board. If you have 5 to 8 tricks, you score only the 1 point per trick. So ideally, you're going to hit 4 tricks and have a large group on the board, or perhaps 7 or 8 tricks and you stuff the opponent so they have everything disconnected and they don't score many points from the group. It's a very different feel because the board is extremely tight as you're playing. Every choice you make, well, it's creating little divisions of where you can play next. If I lead with a yellow 3, then it's creating this point here that's hard for the other player to connect because they would have to build out. Of course, I may not win leading with a yellow 3 because they may have a 4 or 5 to go on top. That's okay. It depends on what you're trying to do. And it's a very tricky situation because everything is so constrained and it's just the 2 of you. I found it kind of interesting. I played twice with a 2-player game where if you declare you're out of a color and you win then with a 1 trump, okay, next turn if I can lead with a 2 trump, the other player is going to have to win with a trump or declare that they're out of trump. And you're trying not to win 5 tricks because if you win 5 tricks, you don't get a bonus based on what you've built on the board here. So depending on how things go, there's lots of little tricky things you can do to force someone to win a trick that they don't want to. Or, again, potentially cause a paradox. If you force them to declare they're out of something when they were going to win something they didn't want to win. It's a different feel because there is no bidding and it's a very tight space. It's very constrained. It still feels like the original game, but it's somewhat different because it is very brief. There's only 2 rounds. Now, one other thing to mention, you notice these cards here. You may wonder why are there cards in this board. I mean, one reason is the board nicely holds the tokens in the slot, but moreover than that, the original game came with cards that allow you to flip this over, and it has this different pattern that is more complicated for making connections. And this version works similarly. If I dump out the cards here and flip them over, you can have this same type of grid that's slid here, and it will make it more complicated as you are trying to make connections. The original game, you did not declare color here. You had these cards that if you want, when you play a number, you could put it over the color that you're playing. It sort of worked, but it was not as visually clear as the new board here, where you can immediately see, looking across the table, more easily what color other people have played. So the bidding board is a nice addition because it's easier to see the colors. This works because the tokens stick more rather than the cardboard tokens, where if you play them here, they can slide around, or if you accidentally hit it, then they're kind of all over the place. The colors are a bit similar in the original edition for these two. The colors are a little similar here as well. These are different colors with a pink and reddish orange, sort of pomegranate color, but they're pretty close, and they're both round. That is not as ideal as it could be, so in a 5-player game, we don't use one of these colors. The other thing I'll mention with components. So the decks, the cards, feel roughly the same. The boards here, I like the change of having tokens to show what colors you have, where here, when you were out of a color, you then marked it to show that you were out, which doesn't work as well mentally. If you look across the board, you have to be sure to see this token and interpret it then as saying, oh, you don't have it. Whereas if I look across the board and I see this, I say, oh, you've got everything. And as soon as you're out of something, it's gone. It is visually gone, and I know it's gone from your hand. It's a better way of thinking about what colors you have by the absence of something rather than the presence of something. So that's a nice change as well. One last thing with the components. The cards in this edition are not all the same color. I don't know if you can quite see it as I fan them, but there are some that are lighter or darker than others. Right? That card looks definitely darker. That is definitely lighter, darker, lighter, darker. So the colors are not consistent, but it's not just one card that's light, thankfully. It's a lot of cards that are lighter or darker. And I haven't yet looked to see, are all the light ones the same number? Are all the dark ones the same number? I am fine having a lot of things. As long as there's variety, and there's lots of variety, then we're not going to memorize which cards are which numbers, and I don't need to sleeve them because I don't like sleeving things. It's okay. Things hold up. The cards seem like they're already a little worn on the corner. This is after 4 complete games with this deck. They're a little more worn than I might think, but, you know, I'm okay. They're going to wear the same as I use them, depending on, of course, whether I have lots of 3-player games. If I do that, then the 7 to 9 won't be used that much, and they may be more visible. These original ones are black, and there are color differences here as well, but they don't have wear on them. So, little details on how things work with the components. To reiterate, I've played 3 times on the original version of the game with 3 and 4 players, and 4 times on this review copy from Bezier Games, the new edition, with 2, 3, and 5 players. The 2-player game is incredibly short. I played twice with 2 players in a half hour. So it's a very quick play. It's very tight and restrained, and it feels very Japanese, by which I mean you can easily make mistakes that doom you. It just feels like you're out. It has these sharp edges where you're trying to make things go right, and something will just, whoop, it's gone, and now I'm not going to score. I got too many tricks. Here, everything is off. It has a minimal score. You're going to have very small point values, and you can go awry very easily, and then you're done. The game lasts 3, 4, or 5 rounds with 3 to 5 players. The 3-player game feels a little short, the 5 a little long, so 4-player game might be just right. And of course, things will speed up as you play more. The 5-player game had 3 people who were playing their first time and is a bit slower as people are trying to figure out what they are doing. The 3-player game feels short because things can be roughly over depending on how well people are doing. In the 3-player game, 1 player scored 10 points in the first round. Other people barely scored, and it felt like, well, how are we possibly going to catch up with them? We've got 2 rounds to do that. If they do anything at all, if they do well at any point, it's done. So that's why it felt short with the 3-player game, because it felt like we didn't have time to catch up. But again, learning games. This is very much a learning game because the trick taking, the flow of the tricks feels very different from other trick taking games because of that openness with what you can do with your cards, and because of the possibility of you just sticking yourself in a hole. It is fascinating to see, but it is hard to figure out how to play well and declare yourself out of a color at the right time and bid properly, because often That's one of the skills in a trick-taking game, is looking at your hand and seeing like, how many sure winners do I have, how many sure losers, and then where's this middle stuff that could go either way depending on how things go. But it's very different because you don't have suits. So how are you going to judge this? It's all just free-flowing, and you're going to dive in sometime to take that trick that maybe you shouldn't, and you're just hoping that everything else works out for you. So I highly recommend playing, because it's a very different type of experience. If you like trick-taking games, it's not like one you've played before, except of course that it has tricks and cards and suits and Trump. Okay, it has new things that you haven't played before.